Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to show you a few ways of how you can use Minitab to calculate probabilities about normal distributions. So as an example, in the lesson 4 slides that should have been in my lesson 4 video, there is a number of different examples, or a number of different what I call maybe your turns, okay, about the normal distribution. And so here's one of them. And so I start off by saying, suppose that we have this thing called a random variable. It has a normal distribution. So it's random, but it behaves with a normal distribution with a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 15. I want you to find the probability that a randomly selected x will be less than 45. And then I ask you a number of different questions between 42 and 65 and greater than 65. In the original video, I showed you how to do it using StatCrunch. You can do it the same way using Minitab. So in Minitab, you have here, okay, that is your main Minitab page. And so one way is to go to Calculate, Probability Distributions. So we're going to calculate something using probability distributions. The specific one we want, of course, is the normal distribution. They say probability distribution. And then it asks you 3 questions. Now, I did not use this language specifically in the videos. And so this is a sticking point for many students, and understandable because I didn't use this language. Okay. This says cumulative distribution function. Then there's a second one called inverse cumulative distribution function, and a third one called probability density function. The one that we are going to be most interested in is cumulative distribution function. And so I'm going to click on that one, and it opens up this new page. And so it's going to ask you, what do you want to input? A single value or a column of values? So it may at some time be helpful or beneficial for you to not just want probabilities about one single number, but a bunch of numbers. And so we could put them in, say, column C1 down here, and they could find probabilities about all of them. Now, a cumulative probability is going to find the probability at and below a point. So it asks for a single value, my input. Now remember, if we go back to my example, it said suppose that this random variable thing x has a normal distribution with mean of 50 and standard deviation 15. So if I go back to my window here, it asks me my mean 50 and standard deviation 15. And now the probability question I'm asking here is find the probability that a randomly selected value of x is less than 45. A cumulative distribution function, the button that we pushed, often called CDF, calculates the probability at and below a point, okay, i.e. exactly this probability. Okay, at 45 and below. Now, there is a question of, is there a difference between less than or equal to? In every other math course, there is. In the statistics course, the answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no. That is a bit the discussion of those, which I may have mentioned in passing, is a little above our pay grade, so to speak. And so for our purposes, less than or equal to are not different. They are the same. Okay? And so a CDF finds exactly this. This thing here, probability that x is less than 45. So I'm going to go back here and enter in 45. Okay, mean of 50, standard deviation of 15, and I'm looking for less than 45. Okay, and so when I click OK, it's going to calculate that and ask this question. And so down here, it says, what's the probability that x is less than or equal to little x? And it says little x is 45 here. And so the answer is 0.369. Again, a little nuanced, but less than and less than or equal to are the same in this circumstance, okay? So 0.369 would be the answer to the first one. Now it gets a little more complicated. In my second question, what's the probability that x is between 42 and 65? All right, so we have to actually ask Minitab to do two calculations for us. Okay, and so unfortunately there is no in-between button, and that can be a little confusing, and we didn't really discuss that in class or in any of the videos. And StatCrunch has a nice feature where it allows you to calculate in between functions. And so with this tool that I'm currently telling you to use, calc, probability distributions, and then one of these three things, it doesn't quite work. Okay, it does work, but I don't want to confuse you by going through the explanation. So what I'm going to do is give you another way in Minitab to calculate these things. Okay, so there is a way that we can find this probability easily. And how we want to do that, and this is the way that you will probably choose to calculate your probabilities if you use Minitab, and that's going to be graph, and then something called probability distribution plot. Okay, probability distribution plot is at the bottom of this here. Now, don't get confused with this probability plot thing. That's very different. We want to do probability distribution plot. Okay, so when I click on probability distribution plot, it gives me a number of options. View distribution or view probability, and we want to view probability. Okay, and so when we do, the first thing that it's going to ask you for is the distribution we're working with. And so that's a normal with mean of 50, standard deviation of 15. And then we want to click options. All right, and so it's going to show you a visual, which StatCrunch does, of the area under the normal curve, which we're talking about, which I find especially helpful, especially helpful when you're learning these new things. Okay, and so you can either ask for a specific probability or a specific x value. Meaning, do I give you a probability and ask you for an x, or do I give you an x and ask a probability? For us, right here, in this question, I give you an x and ask for a probability. My x is 45. I'm asking for a probability. I do the same thing in 2 and 3, but then in the fourth question down here, find the point at which only 5% of the distribution is larger than that. There I give you a probability and ask for a number, an x. So we'll get to that. Okay, do I give you a probability or do I give you an x value? I give you an x value. Okay, and so I could ask for a right tail probability, which is the probability that x is greater than a point. So right tail is greater than a point. Left tail is less than a point. Equal tail is a little bit interesting, meaning greater than a point or less than the negative of that point. We won't use this very often, but we may use, and specifically for the second example, we would use in the middle. Okay, and so in between two values is what we're going to want. And so our lower value is 42, upper value is 65. Lower value 42, upper value 65. When I click OK, it's going to take me back here. I click OK again, and it's going to give me a plot of the normal curve and the area underneath, why that's helpful is this number that it gives you here, 0.5444, is the probability that x is between those two numbers. So that's the answer to the second part. Okay. So second part, what's the probability that x is between 42 and 65? It's that number. This looks much more similar to the StatCrunch option, okay, than the first option I showed you. So for question number 1, less than 45, I would go to graph probability distribution, view probability options, a specified x value, and left tail because it was less than. So less than 45, less than 45.3694. Okay. In between, we just did, what about the probability that x is greater than 55? Graph probability distribution, view probability. Greater than is going to be a right tail. Greater than is right tail. Less than is left tail. Okay, x value 55. Greater than 55. Again, this is also nice visually because you can look and see, is it really, am I calculating greater than 55? Is the red greater than 55 or less than? Okay. So yes, greater than 55, that looks good. And 0.3694 turns out that less than 45 and greater than 55 turn out to be the same probability in this case. Okay, 0.3694. Now the last question is to find the point at which only 5% of the distribution is larger than that. Okay, so again, graph probability distribution plot, view probability, and now instead of giving a specified x value, I give a specified probability. And I said the point at which only 5% lies above, or only 5% of the distribution is larger than that. So that means I want probability in the right tail. 5% is larger. Not in the left tail, that would be 5% is smaller than that. So I want right tail, so make sure the right tail is highlighted or shows up the most. Okay, 5% is already here for me, which is lucky. Okay, all right, always probability as a decimal. And so I'd click OK and OK. And then it gives me, again, a nice plot. It says there's 5% to the right, which is what I want. Only 5% is larger than that. And the answer, the number is down here on the line, okay, 74.67. Okay, so that should be able, with that information, okay, probably you want to use graph probability distribution plot to do all those. You can also use calc probability distributions, and then cumulative, it takes a bit more finesse, okay, and a bit more playing around with the probabilities to do so, but you can. Okay? Hopefully that gives you all the information that you need to calculate probabilities in Minitab.